4 stages every avoidant goes through. During no contact. When you implement no contact with an avoidant, you're not just removing yourself from their life. You're forcing them into a psychological journey they never chose to take and desperately want to avoid. While you're focusing on your own healing and moving forward, they're experiencing a predictable but devastating emotional progression that challenges everything they believe about relationships, independence, and their own emotional needs. The avoidance response to no contact differs dramatically from other attachment styles because their entire identity is built around not needing anyone, especially not needing you. Your sudden absence doesn't just create sadness or longing. It threatens the fundamental narrative they've constructed about their emotional self-sufficiency and their ability to maintain control over their feelings and relationships. What makes this journey particularly brutal for avoidance is that each stage strips away another layer of their psychological defenses, forcing them to confront feelings and needs they've spent years avoiding. Unlike anxiously attached individuals who might immediately panic when contact is cut, avoidants go through an extended process where reality slowly penetrates their carefully constructed emotional walls. Their progression through these stages isn't linear or predictable in timing. Some avoidants speed through certain phases while getting stuck in others for months. But the psychological pattern remains remarkably consistent. Initial relief transforms into creeping anxiety, which escalates into panic, and finally settles into the kind of deep regret that forces genuine self-examination for the first time in their adult lives. Understanding these stages isn't about predicting when they'll come back or strategizing how to manipulate their return. It's about recognizing the profound psychological impact that your absence has on someone whose entire emotional system was designed around the assumption that they could push people away without consequences, maintain distance without loss, and need nothing from no one while keeping everyone available for their convenience when they change their minds. Stage 1. Relief and validation. Initial 2-4 weeks. The avoidant's first response to your no-contact implementation feels like psychological vindication for every fear they've ever had about relationships being suffocating, demanding, and ultimately destructive to their peace of mind. During this initial period, they experience what can only be described as a honeymoon phase with your absence. Finally, they think they can breathe without constantly managing someone else's emotional needs, expectations, and reactions to their hot and cold behavior. Their immediate relief manifests as a return to the emotional baseline they were maintaining before you became important to them. They can go through their daily routines without worrying about disappointing you, can make decisions without considering your feelings, and can maintain their emotional walls without feeling guilty about the impact on someone who cares about them. This freedom feels intoxicating to someone whose nervous system interprets relationship obligations as threats to their autonomy. During this stage, they convince themselves that your absence proves they were right all along about relationships being more trouble than they're worth. They tell themselves that the stress they felt during your connection was evidence that intimate relationships are inherently problematic rather than evidence that their own emotional patterns create unnecessary conflict. Your departure validates their long-held belief that it's safer and easier to be alone than to deal with the complications that caring about someone inevitably creates. They often experience a surge of productivity and social energy during this period, throwing themselves into work projects, reconnecting with friends they may have neglected during your relationship, and pursuing activities that make them feel competent and self-sufficient. This burst of activity serves multiple purposes. It distracts them from any uncomfortable feelings about your absence, while proving to themselves that they're perfectly capable of having a fulfilling life without you. The avoidant uses this time to reinforce their narrative about why the relationship couldn't work, mentally cataloging all the ways your needs felt overwhelming, your expectations felt unreasonable, and your emotional investment felt like pressure they couldn't handle. They focus on the relief of not having to navigate relationship conversations, not having to manage your reactions to their withdrawal, and not having to feel guilty about their inability to provide the consistency you were seeking. Their relief is particularly intense around not having to deal with the internal conflict that your presence created. During the relationship, they were constantly battling between their desire for connection and their fear of vulnerability, between their feelings for you and their need for emotional safety. Your absence eliminates this internal war, allowing them to return to the emotional numbness they've always found more comfortable than the intensity of genuine attachment. They often interpret your no-contact decision as evidence that you've finally understood what they were trying to communicate through their hot and cold behavior, that they're not capable of the kind of relationship you wanted and that you're better off without them. This interpretation allows them to feel like the good guy who was just being honest about their limitations, rather than the person who pushed away someone who cared about them. During this stage, they may even feel grateful that you made the decision to leave because it relieved them of having to hurt you further through their continued emotional unavailability. They convince themselves that your departure was actually the kindest possible outcome for both parties, allowing them to avoid the guilt of causing more pain, while giving you the opportunity to find someone who can meet your needs. The avoidance relief during this period is also fueled by their return to feeling emotionally invulnerable. Without you in their life, there's no one who can trigger their attachment fears, no one whose opinion matters enough to create anxiety, no one who can hurt them through rejection or abandonment. This invulnerability feels like strength rather than the emotional numbness it actually represents. They often use this time to convince themselves that they never really needed you as much as they thought they did. The absence of daily emotional pain about the relationship becomes evidence that their feelings weren't as deep as they seemed during moments of connection. They rewrite the history of your relationship to minimize the importance of what you shared, telling themselves it was just a temporary attachment rather than the profound connection it actually was. The most dangerous aspect of this relief stage is how it reinforces their avoidant patterns rather than challenging them. Instead of recognizing that their relief comes from avoiding vulnerability rather than from genuine healing, they interpret it as proof that their emotional strategies are healthy and effective. This misinterpretation sets them up for the harder stages that follow when reality begins to penetrate their defensive euphoria. Stage 2. Creeping awareness and anxiety, weeks 4-8. As the initial honeymoon period of your absence fades, the avoidant begins to experience subtle but persistent signs that their psychological celebration was premature. The relief they felt during the first few weeks starts giving way to a creeping awareness that something fundamental has shifted in their emotional landscape. Not the temporary discomfort of missing someone, but the deeper realization that you might actually be gone for good, and that this permanent absence creates feelings they weren't prepared to handle. Their anxiety during this stage manifests first as a general restlessness that they can't quite identify or explain. They find themselves feeling vaguely unsettled during activities that used to provide comfort, experiencing difficulty concentrating on work or hobbies that previously absorbed their attention completely. This restlessness stems from their nervous system's growing recognition that they've lost something important, even though their conscious mind is still insisting that your absence is what they wanted. The avoidant begins to notice the silence where your presence used to be, not just in terms of communication, but in the overall texture of their daily experience. They realize that your voice, your perspective, your reactions to their thoughts and experiences had become more integrated into their daily mental landscape than they ever acknowledged. Without that familiar frequency, their world feels strangely hollow in ways they struggle to articulate even to themselves. During this phase, they start experiencing what psychologists call intrusive thoughts about you. Sudden, unwanted moments where you pop into their consciousness without warning. They might be going about their normal routine when a memory of something you said, a place you went together, or simply your face appears in their mind with startling clarity. These intrusions feel threatening because they contradict their narrative about having moved on successfully from your connection. Their anxiety intensifies around the growing realization that you're not coming back. During the relief stage, some part of them assumed that your absence was temporary, that you were giving them space, but would eventually return to restore the familiar dynamic. But as weeks pass without any contact from you, the permanence of your departure begins to feel real in ways that trigger their deepest abandonment fears. The avoidant starts noticing how empty their communication landscape has become without your texts, calls, and social media interactions. They realize they had been taking for granted the consistent warmth and interest you provided, the way you remembered details about their life, the way you checked in during difficult times. Without this background hum of care and attention, their world feels notably colder and more isolated. They begin experiencing unexpected emotional reactions to triggers that remind them of you, songs you both liked, places you visited together, activities you shared. These reactions catch them off guard because they contradict their belief that they should be feeling relief rather than loss. The involuntary nature of these emotional responses makes them feel out of control in ways that trigger their anxiety about being vulnerable and dependent. During this stage, the avoidant often attempts to recreate the comfort and connection they had with you through other relationships or activities, but these attempts feel hollow and unsatisfying. They might reach out to old friends, try dating other people, or throw themselves into social activities, but nothing fills the specific space that your presence occupied in their emotional ecosystem. This failure to replace what they lost creates additional anxiety about whether they made a terrible mistake. Their sleep patterns often become disrupted during this phase, as their subconscious mind processes the reality of your absence. They might experience vivid dreams about you, wake up thinking about conversations you had, or find themselves lying awake at night replaying moments from your relationship. These unconscious processes reveal that their attachment to you was deeper than their conscious mind wants to acknowledge. The avoidant begins to question their initial interpretation of your departure, wondering whether your no-contact decision represents healthy boundary setting rather than giving up on them. This shift in perception creates anxiety because it suggests that you might be growing and moving forward in ways that leave them behind permanently, rather than simply taking a temporary break from their hot and cold behavior. They start noticing patterns in their own behavior that they had previously attributed to your presence, realizing that some of their anxiety and emotional conflict wasn't caused by the relationship, but by their own internal struggles with intimacy and vulnerability. Without you to blame for their discomfort, they're forced to confront the possibility that their emotional patterns are internal issues rather than relationship problems. The most unsettling aspect of this stage is how their carefully constructed narrative about why your absence is positive begins to crumble under the weight of their actual emotional experience. They can no longer convince themselves that they're better off without you when their daily reality feels emptier, lonelier, and more meaningless than it did when you were part of their life. This cognitive dissonance creates the foundation for the more intense stages that follow. Stage 3, panic and desperate monitoring, weeks 8 to 16. As the avoidance, creeping anxiety crystallizes into full awareness that you might genuinely be gone forever, they enter a phase of psychological panic that completely contradicts everything they thought they knew about their own emotional needs and attachment capabilities. This stage represents the complete breakdown of their carefully constructed narrative about being better off alone, replaced by a desperate scramble to regain some form of connection to you without having to admit their terror of permanent loss. The panic manifests first as an obsessive need to monitor your life from a distance, creating elaborate surveillance systems that would shock you with their thoroughness and frequency. They check your social media multiple times daily, not just scrolling past your content, but studying every photo, analyzing every caption, and searching for clues about your emotional state, your social activities, and most importantly, whether there are signs of romantic involvement with someone else. This monitoring becomes compulsive, interrupting their work, their sleep, and their attempts to focus on anything else. Their information gathering extends far beyond social media to include questioning mutual friends with carefully crafted casual inquiries, driving by places they know you frequent, and maintaining awareness of your professional and social activities through any available channels. They become amateur private investigators, piecing together a picture of your life without them, while desperately searching for signs that you're struggling, missing them, or reconsidering your decision to cut contact. During this phase, the avoidant experiences what can only be described as withdrawal symptoms from your absence. They feel physically agitated, emotionally dysregulated, and mentally preoccupied in ways that mirror addiction recovery. Their nervous system, which had adapted to the consistent presence of your energy and attention, is now in crisis mode, trying to cope with the sudden elimination of what had become a primary source of emotional regulation. They begin drafting messages to you that they never send, writing long explanations of their behavior, apologies for their limitations, and attempts to reopen communication disguised as casual check-ins. Their phones become graveyards of unsent texts, deleted voice messages, and abandoned attempts to reach out without appearing desperate or needy. This internal communication reveals the depth of what they want to say, but are too terrified to express directly. The panic intensifies when they realize that their usual emotional management strategies aren't working to cope with your absence. Distraction through work fails because thoughts of you intrude constantly. Social activities feel hollow because other people's company only highlights what they're missing with you. Even their tried and true methods of emotional numbing, whether through substances, mindless entertainment, or compulsive behaviors, provide only temporary relief from the growing void your absence has created. They experience intense anxiety about the possibility that you're moving on and finding happiness without them. Every sign of your continued life and growth feels like evidence that you didn't need them as much as they thought you did, which triggers both their fear of being replaceable and their deeper fear of having lost something irreplaceable through their own emotional limitations. This anxiety often manifests as physical symptoms: sleep disruption, appetite changes, difficulty concentrating, and general restlessness. During this stage, the avoidant often attempts to recreate connection with you through proxy behaviors, revisiting places you went together, engaging with content you enjoyed, or maintaining habits you shared. They might continue watching shows you watched together, ordering food from restaurants you both liked, or keeping routines that were influenced by your preferences. These behaviors represent desperate attempts to maintain some form of connection when direct contact feels impossible. Their panic extends to realizing that they can't easily replace what you provided in their life. Previous relationships or casual connections feel superficial and unsatisfying compared to the depth of understanding and acceptance you offered. They begin to understand that finding someone who knew them as well as you did, who appreciated their complexity despite their limitations, and who was willing to be patient with their emotional patterns might be nearly impossible. The avoidant starts experiencing genuine regret about specific behaviors and choices that contributed to your departure. Unlike the general guilt they might have felt before, this regret is precise and painful. They remember exact conversations where they could have been more open, specific moments when they chose distance over connection, and particular instances when they hurt you through their emotional unavailability. This specificity makes the regret feel more real and actionable, but also more devastating. They begin questioning whether their interpretation of relationship problems was accurate, wondering if the discomfort they felt during your connection was actually growth rather than incompatibility. This reframing is terrifying because it suggests that they pushed away exactly what they needed for emotional development, choosing familiar dysfunction over unfamiliar healing. The possibility that they sabotaged their own growth through fear becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Their desperate monitoring often reveals that you're doing better without them than they expected, which creates a complex mix of emotions. Pride in your strength and growth combined with devastating recognition that their presence might have been holding you back rather than adding value to your life. This realization forces them to confront their impact on your well-being in ways they had previously avoided. The most panic-inducing aspect of this stage is the growing awareness that their window for repair might be closing permanently. Unlike previous relationship conflicts where they could eventually return and resume the dynamic, your no contact represents a fundamental shift in availability that might not be reversible. This recognition of potential permanent loss triggers survival-level panic in someone whose entire emotional system was built on the assumption that people would always be available when they decided to reconnect. Stage 4. Depression and profound regret. Months 4+. When the avoidance panic finally exhausts itself against the reality of your continued absence, they enter the deepest and most transformative stage of the no-contact experience. A period of profound depression that forces them to confront not just what they've lost, but who they've been and how their emotional patterns have shaped their entire approach to love and relationships. This isn't temporary sadness, it's a fundamental reckoning with the costs of their attachment style. The depression that settles in during this stage feels different from any emotional experience they've had before because it can't be managed through their usual avoidance strategies. They can't distract themselves from it, can't numb it effectively, and can't escape it through their typical emotional management techniques. Your absence has created a void so central to their daily experience that they're forced to sit with feelings they've spent their entire adult life avoiding. They begin to experience what therapists call complicated grief, mourning not just your relationship, but the version of themselves that existed when they were connected to you. They realize they were more authentic, more alive, more capable of joy when you were part of their world, and they're now grieving the loss of that better version of themselves along with grieving your absence. This dual loss feels overwhelming in ways they struggle to articulate even to themselves. The avoidant starts understanding the true cost of their emotional patterns in ways that extend far beyond your specific relationship. They begin to see how their fear of vulnerability has cost them depth in friendships, intimacy with family members, and authentic connection in every area of their life. Your departure becomes the catalyst for recognizing a lifetime of choosing safety over meaningful connection, leading to profound regret about opportunities missed and relationships sacrificed. During this phase, they often experience what psychologists call rumination, obsessive replay of your relationship with painful clarity about their role in its destruction. They remember specific moments when they could have chosen differently, exact conversations where they deflected instead of engaging, particular instances when they hurt you through their emotional withdrawal. This rumination is torture, but it's also the beginning of genuine self-awareness about their patterns. They face the devastating recognition that they didn't just lose you, they actively pushed you away through consistent choices that prioritize their comfort over your connection. Unlike losses due to external circumstances, this loss feels entirely preventable, which adds layers of self-blame and regret that compound their depression. They understand that they are the author of their own suffering in ways that feel almost unbearable. The avoidant begins to comprehend the depth of what you offered them and how little they appreciated it while they had it. They realize you weren't just someone who loved them. You were someone who saw their potential, who believed in their capacity for growth, who offered patience while they learned to love without fear. The recognition of this gift and how carelessly they treated it creates a special kind of anguish that penetrates their emotional defenses completely. Their depression often includes profound loneliness that goes beyond missing you, specifically to missing the feeling of being truly known and accepted by another person. They understand now that superficial connections can't fill the space left by someone who understood their fears, appreciated their complexity, and loved them despite their limitations. This level of connection feels irreplaceable in ways that create existential despair about their future capacity for meaningful relationships. They start questioning fundamental assumptions about what constitutes strength and weakness in relationships. The independence they prized so highly now feels like isolation. The emotional control they maintained so carefully now feels like numbness. And the freedom they thought they wanted now feels like emptiness. This complete reversal of their value system creates disorientation and depression as they realize their entire approach to relationships was based on fear rather than wisdom. The avoidant often experiences intense shame during this stage about how they treated you and what their behavior revealed about their character. They recognize that their hot and cold patterns weren't just personality quirks, but actually cruel treatment of someone who deserved consistency and care. This shame feels particularly devastating because they can't undo the damage they caused or take back the pain they inflicted through their emotional unavailability. They begin to understand that their fear of being hurt actually guaranteed they would be hurt, just in a different way. By avoiding the vulnerability that relationships require, they ensured they would experience the very abandonment and loneliness they were trying to prevent. This recognition of their self-defeating patterns adds another layer to their depression, as they realize they created their own worst fears through their attempts to avoid them. During this stage, many avoidants experience what can only be called spiritual depression, a loss of meaning and purpose that comes from recognizing how their fear has limited their capacity for the human experiences that make life worth living. They understand that they've been existing rather than truly living, surviving rather than thriving, and protecting themselves in ways that prevented them from experiencing the depth and richness that meaningful relationships provide. The most profound aspect of this depression is how it strips away all their defenses and forces them to feel the full weight of their losses without any buffer or protection. For perhaps the first time in their adult lives, they can't escape into emotional numbness, can't distract themselves from painful feelings, and can't convince themselves that isolation is preferable to the risks of connection. This raw experience of unfiltered emotion is both devastating and potentially transformative, depending on what they choose to do with these insights about themselves and their patterns.